This
haven't
conference will now be recorded.
I haven't seen the reminder come through yet, but
Yeah, I don't know.
all right, well,
But,
we'll
yeah.
go ahead and get started then. So welcome everybody, good morning. Thanks for joining us for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Open Science Subcommittee meeting. We will start with, since we have a small group right now, we'll start with introductions and we'll see if people trickle in as we go on. So I'm Megan Schrant. I'm with FWC Fish and Wildlife Research Institute here in St. Pete, and I work with the Fisheries Independent Monitoring Group. I'm not sure the best way to go about this because everybody's people list is probably in a different order, but maybe we'll start with Estuary Program staff first and then go alphabetical after that.
Yep. Everyone knows me. I'm Marcus. I'm the other co-chair of this committee, and I'll be talking a lot later, so I'll shut up now.
I'm Maya Burke. I'm the Assistant Director of the Estuary Program.
I'm Greg Blanchard with Manatee County Natural Resources Department.
Julie Christian, Environmental Protection Commission.
Paul
Alex,
Julian. I knew it. The minute I was going to open my mouth. Paul Julian,
you go.
SCCF. Yeah, thanks. SCCF and Conservancy of Southwest Florida.
I don't know where we're at in the order, but I'm Alex Illich. I'm a grad student at the University of South Florida College of Marine Science.
Matt, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Matt Jones. I'm the Director of Informatics at NCEAS, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And I operate a few data repositories in Data One and the Arctic Data Center, among others.
Mike.
Sure. Hey, this is Mike McManus. I'm an ecologist with the US EPA's Office of Research and Development here in St. Pete.
Thank you. Okay, I think Dave, I think I saw you come in. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, Dave Carlin, Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County.
Thank you. All right, I don't think I missed anybody if I did jump in. And I guess with that, we will go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to Marcus. He'll give us a little update on TBEP's Open Science updates, and then we'll continue from there.
All right. Well, we got a small group today, so we can keep it informal. You may have noticed that we have only one presenter this meeting. We've usually had two in the past, but last meeting I shunted the discussion with Greg Blanchard, so apologies to Greg, and we moved it to this time, this meeting, and now just have one speaker. But I'm really excited to hear what Matt has got to say about data repositories, because I know that was a request last time as a topic for the group. So I'll explain a little bit more about the motivation for that when I queue up Matt. But at the end, we'll have a discussion with Greg as well about no-code, low-code apps, which is an interesting concept that I think will be relevant to this group. So before we dive into all that, I do have some updates as per the usual. Again, reiterating what this group is all about. I like to start off with that because it's always a good reminder to revisit why we exist as a subcommittee. Basically, we have, I think, three main roles, the TBEP being the facilitator for this group. Primarily, we like to just support the development of open science products within our program. But of course, we're a small group and we can't do that without our partners. So we're trying to use this committee as a cohesive unit to sort of spur discussions about open science and what it can do for not just our program, but how we can use it to disseminate scientific products for action among our partners. So that's kind of the main goal. In doing so, we try to rank priority research areas for developing these products. In the past, we've obviously covered several different products that are relevant to managing Tampa Bay, water quality dashboards, tidal creeks, fishery stuff, and then moving forward, we try to use this group as a way to vet which topics we focus on moving forward. And then, of course, training is a big part of it as well. We actually haven't done a training in a while. We had an R training way back when I first started. We actually were trying to do an open science training last year, and I think we're going to try to get that on the books for early next year. We were trying to get that at basis in March, but I had a child, so I couldn't do that training at the time. So we're still planning on doing that, but we try to do trainings at least once or twice a year on topics that are relevant to this group, any open science things that are going to be useful. So those are the three main things we try to do with this group. You can check out the guidance document for more information about that. That really codifies the roles and responsibilities of this group. I'm going to try something different this time around for how we solicit feedback for our presenters and as well as the discussion. If you remember last meeting, we had a presentation by Michael Meyer, USGS. He does the data science, open science group and has been very successful with that. And he sort of talked about how he got that group off the ground during the pandemic, no less. But one idea that I blatantly stole from him was this presenter question form that I'm going to try out this time. It's basically you can go to this form, and I will actually put that link in the chat so you can have it. So you can go to this forum, and if you're watching Matt present or you're watching the discussion between Greg and myself and others, and you have a question or a comment, you can actually go to this forum and enter it, and we'll see it on our end. The organizers have access to the submitted responses, and you can obviously just unmute yourself, being that we're a small group, and you could ask your question directly if you want to do that. Totally fine, but we're going to try this out because this is a way to just, anonymously submit questions if you want to do that, or if you want to sort of spend some time to think about what your question is, you can, think about that as you're typing it. So we'll try this out. If we don't like it, we don't have to use it in the future, but I thought it might be fun to try. The reason that Mike Meyer uses this is they had these forums for their conferences or their workshops in the past where they were playing pre-recorded talks, and so I think maybe it might work well for that format. But we'll try it out here and see if we like it, and if not, we don't have to use it in the future. But just throwing that out there. I put the link in the chat so you can use that as we go through the presentations today. Next announcement. So TBEP Tools is an R package that we've developed here at our program to help us sort of synthesize different data sets for reporting. I actually made a new release recently, early in July, to version 2.0.1, and it actually covers a lot of different updates, but you can check them all out here, the release notes on GitHub. That describes a couple things, but the biggest one was basically we have various report cards, so sort of color-coded stoplight graphics that describe different components of the bay that we care about, that we monitor and report on, and these represent kind of a collection of methods from different reports or papers that really were showing the graphics in different ways. So I actually went through and updated all the code to make sure that the color scheme was all the same. And you could argue that colors are not that important, but the greens were slightly different from the water quality to the nectin and so on and so forth. So I actually went through and made all the colors similar so that we had kind of a unified front in terms of presenting this branding to our partners. That might seem kind of trivial, but why I did this is because we actually just released our State of the Bay report. And so I've talked a lot about State of the Bay in the past to this group about what we try to do with it, but we actually have a print copy now released last week, I think, when it was finished, or 2 weeks ago. Joe Whalen, he's our comms coordinator. He's been very much at work creating this document, but a lot of data sets are going into this, a lot of summarized graphics, and so Joe worked with all of us and myself to get those graphics in there. And so we wanted to make sure that the copy that was in there was actually, looked nice and follow the formatting and guidelines that we wanted to present in this document. And so just a quick summary about State of the Bay. This is something we do every 3-ish years that is sort of this synthesis document of how we're doing as a program, how we're doing on achieving progress towards different priorities that we care about for the Bay under our CCMP document. And so the 2022 version, it's just been out, summarizes progress from 2019 through 2021. You can get to it from the web page, and I'll put that in the chat. But here's the print version, so you can download a PDF here. So, this is meant to be in print format, so, not necessarily viewable on the web, but you can get it here this way. In the spirit of open science, we've got a lot of different assets made available from this. So if you go to this link, this is a Google Drive that has basically links to all of the graphics that we use in there if you want to repurpose them for your own reports or whatever. So that's available as well. And so this is the print version, but as I think presented to this group in the past, we also have kind of a companion web version of this as well. So these are actually links to different HTML compiled web pages that are built on GitHub that are actually kind of mirrored in the print version now, but kind of showcasing them in parallel on the web to kind of have this unified front for how we're reporting the information. So multiple ways you can get to this document, but the print version is what's new, recently released about 2 weeks ago. So just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Another dashboard that's been released since we last met is our nitrogen loading dashboard. This is under the, actually, if you go to the data viz component of our web page, you can get to it from there. But just briefly about nitrogen loads, I mean, this is something that we have been tracking for a long time in Tampa Bay. I mean, nitrogen is the main pollutant that causes water quality issues in the Bay. And so we have model-based estimates of nitrogen that goes back all the way to pretty much the mid-'80s. And so we've been using these estimates for a long time as a program, primarily under our reasonable assurance agreement with DEP to report to them with our partners, but the results haven't really been made accessible in a way to view them, download them, and so I thought it'd be great to actually have a little web page that has this information out there. And so if you go here, there's some summary information, kind of comparing, what historical estimates were with what we're at now, and kind of showing the decline over time by controlling point sources primarily. Some background about how we manage nitrogen in the Bay, and then various tabs to get to the different products. And so these are all graphics that are interactive. This isn't actually a shiny dashboard. This is an R Markdown rendered HTML document that uses various JavaScript libraries to make it appear interactive, but it's not shiny in the sense that there's not a server on the back end that lets you have some interactivity like you might have with some of our other dashboards. But nonetheless, it is on our website. It is built on GitHub. It does kind of work seamlessly with our web page. So there's graphics, there's tables, there's downloads, all that fun stuff. So that's something new that we put out there that we think is a nice way to showcase these load estimates made accessible to our partners. So that's out there. I welcome feedback on that. And then I think the last update I have is about participatory science. I think many of you probably saw this email from EPA. They recently released what they're calling their vision for participatory science. So I think this is a institutional movement towards a combined use of the term for participatory science. So, in the past it was citizen science, volunteer science. I think open science has been used as well, and I think they're trying to move towards a new, more all-inclusive definition, and also just sort of establish a vision for how they can, as an agency, guide the states and who they work with on actually implementing participatory science. So you can check out this webpage that kind of describes what is their vision. There's actually a nice document I was looking at here that sort of describes how they're going to stage out this guidance in the future. And so at this point, I'm actually going to ask maybe Mike if you want to say a few words about EPA's vision, since this is Mike is our EPA representative here on the group. So yeah, I don't know if you can say more than what I said, but
yeah, I do want to give a little bit more background because this does mark a shift in sort of how, not just a phrasing, but an approach. And so one thing I just posted in the chat is a link to a perspective on participatory science. And it was very interesting. I went back through my emails because we've been receiving notices about this, and there has been an evolution in the language, because even back in spring, Administrator Regan said in an email about participatory science, he actually wrote about wanting to get it implemented, and he wrote it as integrate participatory, and in parentheses, community science in EPA's research and implementation. So even as early as spring, there's this idea of evolving, how do we want to use this term? And the perspective that I put in the chat is important, because when this got more solidified with the vision document that Marcus has been referring to, they actually put out a perspective about it. And as many of you may know, EPA has a lot of different offices. So there's the Office of Air, Office of Water, Office of Land and Emergency Management. Well, when they wanted to get the word out about participatory science, they actually chose one of the head scientists out of the Office of Research and Development, where I work, to give that announcement. And what I like about her announcement is that participatory science entails some responsibility with it. And so there's a nice link in there to the story map, where you can see different examples of participatory science. And I can post that in the chat if you want to take a look at that as well. Oh, there, Marcus has it. Yeah, and what's great about this story map, if you just scroll, just right there, Marcus, is great. One is some good background, some good introduction, but really the top 6 headers there that run from environmental justice to state and tribal science, those all give examples of participatory science and ongoing projects. So it's a neat way to see what's EPA doing, and you'll find out that there's a lot of overlap with participatory science among those topics. Now, one thing that I thought was good, besides giving the different descriptions and maps of what projects are going on, is actually the second to the last tab is the EPA resources. And if you just want to hit that and scroll just down a bit, what I really almost wish they would have led with is when you get down to a description of a handbook. And what's invaluable about this is that it's right there, is the Citizen Science Quality Assurance Handbook. What participatory science entails is that you actually have to be involved, is that it's not just sitting in and receiving the science, it's being involved in it. And that includes everything from What is the question we're asking? How are we designing it? What data are being collected? And what's the inference? And I almost wish they had led with this resource link first, because when it comes to doing participatory science or science in general at the EPA, you've always got to ask the question of why should someone trust us? And that's what this whole quality assurance document is about, is that if you're doing participatory science and working with the EPA, you have to realize that there's some data quality standards that need to be met. And I've forwarded to Marcus an article that I think we can bring up for another time about participatory science and how you can make the same measurement, but depending upon how you design your studies, have vastly different inference. And so I think this idea of participatory science, of getting the community, the people involved, living and working in that location together to handle those responsibilities of the question, the design, the data, and the inference, I think is a real worthwhile discussion to have. So I think we can pursue the story map option in the future, but it's a good way to sort of see how EPA is trying to shift into this newer role. So that's what I had for, and I'll take any questions, but by no means am I an expert in participatory science.
Thanks for that overview, Mike. That was a lot more informative than my description of what EPA is trying to do. So I appreciate that. Any questions for Mike about that? All right. Well, I will transition then to Matt's talk. As I said before, we past meetings have had a lot of interest in data repositories. I think there's just kind of a lack of knowledge in general about what they can be used for and how they can help towards not just having the data live on in perpetuity, but just open science and sharing in general. And so I'll preface it by saying that we at the Estuary program have made efforts to raise awareness about data repositories. One is our data management SOP, which is a book down web document that we released late last year, I think. And there's quite a bit of text in here, but there are some sections about where the data live, not really going in any level of detail in terms of how it's done, but kind of just making it be known that there are data repositories where you can put this information so that others can access it. So this was our attempt to try to just make it be known that there are options. And we're actually, how we're putting this into action is we're actually, through our T-Birth grant program that Maya and Jessica administer, when we write into contract with people that we're funding these projects for, we're actually putting in contract language that says they have to make their data open if they're collecting data as part of this effort, and sort of mandating that they use open source practices to do so. And so we're kind of using this carrot and the stick type approach to do it, but I think in general as a program we could do better. And so that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this today. And so I actually met Matt for the first time in 2017 at NC's, which is in Santa Barbara, California, and he was giving with help of many other folks, it was a 2 or 3 week workshop about open science. So Matt is definitely a metadata expert and great inspiration for how you can sort of make data open. And so I wanted to invite him and just give just a general overview about demystifying data repositories for us. So I'll hand it over to you now, Matt. Can you take controls, or do I need to give them to you?
Yeah, thank you. I don't see it yet. I don't see the control yet.
Make presenter.
There we go.
All right.
Okay. Nice to have you.
Yep, looks good on my end.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you for inviting me, Marcus, and everybody. It's great to be here. Marcus, when you invited me to talk about demystifying data repositories, I thought to myself, so what's so mystical about them? You know, it's like they're data repositories where we put data. But it's actually a pretty interesting topic, and thinking about the landscape is quite a bit more complicated than you might think when you first start looking at it. And so it was kind of fun putting this together and putting together these slides. I'm going to come at this from the perspective of kind of a broad network of data repositories called Data One that I've been a part of. Also invited my colleague Dave Iglesias, who's here online with us. He came in a little bit after we got started, but Dave's the on the management team of Data One along with me, and we can both answer questions about a wide variety of repositories in the earth and environmental sciences. So it's really inspiring to see the sort of operating procedures document that you guys are working under. I think at NCEAS, where I'm from, we have a very similar type of motivation. You know, we're really focused on open and reproducible research. We're trying to, NCEAS as an organization has a mission to synthesize earth and environmental information, whether that's on climate change or fisheries or on sustainability. You know, those sorts of broad topics on the earth and the environment all relate to advances in science, the ability to govern, regulate environmental action, and affect policy. And so these are really important things, and we think open and reproducible research play a huge role in our ability to undertake synthetic and cross-cutting science. So repositories really are at the heart of that type of an activity because they provide a mechanism for basically producing findable, accessible, and interoperable data that can be reused for synthesis. So many of you have probably heard of the acronym FAIR. This came up probably about a decade ago, and really focuses on the attributes that make open data important for science. And so I'm going to focus a bit on these kinds of FAIR properties of data repositories and how they can help us understand the repository landscape. You know, at Data One, we had a mission of trying to make earth and environmental data available, and as part of that, we started doing some surveys to try to understand the landscape of sort of attitudes towards open data sharing. So Carol Tenneper and the assessment team at Data One went about conducting a wide variety of surveys of both scientists and librarians and other groups, librarians, and they published some really nice survey results in 2011 and 2015, looking at whether or not scientists really want to share their data. And overwhelmingly, I think the answer to that question is yes these days. That when you ask people whether they want to use other people's data, if it's easily accessible, whether they're willing to share their own data across other people, and whether they're it's appropriate to create new data sets from shared data, it's almost usually yes is the answer to that. But then the question of whether you currently share all of your data that's possible, or even most of your data, the answer gets a lot lower. Like typically people have a lot more constraints on their time and other constraints on, say, data distribution that prevent them from getting there. So I think we're in a situation now where we have a broad number of people that are willing, but we still need to make it efficient and effective and easy for people to do so, and make it fit right into the daily work of people that are out there working in research fields across the environmental sciences. When people do share their data, one of the interesting things is that they're sharing their data in ways that aren't necessarily that interoperable. So one of the other aspects of this survey was that they looked at the metadata that's used to document and describe the data sets that are being published across the world. There are a wide variety of metadata standards that are used by different disciplines and by different agencies. A few of the common ones include the ecological metadata language, the Federal Geographic Data Committee's standards, and the International Standards Organization's standards. And you can see those bars in this graph are relatively low. And the predominant thing that's going on there in that big red bar is that people aren't really following a metadata standard when they're releasing the data. Or when they do follow some sort of a standard, it's a standard that's been sort of generated by and sort of curated in an individual lab or an individual research group. And so I think one of the things we need to do in order to improve interoperability and to think about how to get all of this data to work together is to start focusing on how we can use standards to promote that kind of interoperability. And that's a role that repositories play, because they almost all enforce different types of standards on data deposition and publication. So there are a lot of research data repositories in the world. I recently did a survey, a query on the Re3 data site, which is a registry that lists all of the research data repositories, or not all, but many of the research data repositories that exist in the world. This is a great resource if you're looking for some place to go and find a repository to contribute to, or in a particular field. When I query that repository, I find over 700 bio-related repositories and over 650 geo-related repositories for, probably well over 1,000 combined. And these span everything from highly specific data repositories on one particular, say, research project, to broad agency efforts, generic repositories, and others. And so there is just this huge landscape of repositories to choose from. Re3 data provides a really nice classification of these. And so if you look at those icons on the right-hand side, you'll see each repository has, an indicator of whether it's an open access repository, what kind of licensing it does, whether it mints DOIs, and other sorts of features. And so you can find a lot of great information about the repository landscape here at Re3 Data. So in general, when we're talking about program-wide deposits in data repositories, like the TBEP program or other programs that are focused on a pretty wide variety of research topics, I think there's generally a need for open repositories that are general enough in nature that they can sort of support all different types of data. So there are a lot of different repositories out there that are what I would consider general purpose data collections. They'll accept data from both hydrology and, say, atmospheric science and oceanography. They'll accept data on social science, on economics, and other types of fields. And so these repositories, I've listed a few of them here, have different types of origins, but they're all incredibly useful for researchers that want to find a place to deposit their data in a long-lived archive. So I operate the first two of these. The KNB is the Knowledge Network for Biocomplexity, and the NSF Arctic Data Center. These both came out of National Science Foundation funding, and basically serve, the KNB serves an earth and environmental science community and is an open repository. The NSF Arctic Data Center serves the Arctic research community and is also open as long as data are from the Arctic. Similarly, the Environmental Data Initiative, EDI, is funded out of NSF and serves the environmental biology community. The Dryad repository, originally again from NSF funding, but now serves a wide variety of cross-domain researchers who are interested in depositing their data, especially data that's associated with journal publications, and Zenodo out of CERN in Switzerland that supports pretty much any disciplinary deposit of data. And each of these repositories supports, a full suite of data archival operations. Some of them are more attuned or are set up to do data curation and then do a data quality assurance. And some of them are kind of caveat emptor repositories in the sense that you deposit your data and what you deposit is what you get. So the KNB and the Zenodo are kind of caveat emptor repositories, whereas like the Arctic Data Center and EDI and Dryad all have varying degrees of curation for data deposits. So these kinds of general repositories, like on the left, are in contrast to really disciplinary specific repositories that I've listed here on the right. So the general repositories will take pretty much any kind of data, whereas the disciplinary repositories are often focused on a single type of data, oftentimes in even a sub-discipline of a particular field. And so I've given a few examples here. There are literally thousands of these. VegBank is a vegetation database developed by the Ecological Society of America. The Protein Data Bank is one of the largest open databases of protein sequence data. I've listed here the South Florida Water Management District, which is a project-specific data repository, which we're helping to operate now in South Florida, and then the Rolling Deck repository, which is a large repository of all the data collected off of NSF ocean-going vessels. And so these types of repositories, whether they're highly disciplinarily specific or whether they're general, are operated by both academic disciplines, like the first ones on the top, all the way down through say state and university organizations like Johns Hopkins, through federal agencies like ESS Dive, that's operated by the Department of Energy. So there's just this huge variety of repositories that are available, but they all in many ways operate fairly similarly. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes just kind of reviewing a few of the things that are part of the K&B repository that we operate, just to give a sense of what we do. I mean, the main goal for depositing data in the K&B is to provide a long-term archival record of a data set that's well enough documented that the data set can be downloaded, understood, properly interpreted, and reused for various types of analyses by other researchers. There are a couple different motivations for this. One of them is the concept of reproducibility. If somebody publishes a study, you want to really understand whether or not the analysis and models and interpretations that they had coming out of that study were correct, or whether there are areas for improvement. Then you want to get access to the data that backs those analyses. Science is really driven by and completely dependent upon the evidence for the claims that we make. And so the data are the primary part of that evidence, and we want to provide that. And so the first thing we want to do is provide data for reproducibility and for part of the evidence chain. And then a second major area is providing data for other people to use and reuse, so that we can protect our investment in science. So we spend a lot of time collecting data. We invest tremendous amounts of money in that. And that money and time, oftentimes in the past decades, in the 60s and 70s, was very beneficial for the papers and research that came out. But then that historical data is oftentimes lost. And so now, with these types of long-term archival repositories, we can build records like the one I show here, that's age, sex, and length data for salmon that spans 8 decades of research from 1922 to 2017. And so this was a compiled data set that synthesized a lot of the salmon research that was happening in Alaska and pulled it all together in one place. And this allows researchers to both download and access this, and then they can cite that when they reuse this data set. You'll notice in the listing of the data set, there's a wide variety of data files. These are all in open formats, so particularly we focus on CSV, but you could use other formats like NetCDF or GeoTIFFs or other things that are appropriate for your data. But there's also in here an RMD file, which is an R Markdown file. We really encourage people to deposit both code and data that's associated with their studies, so that you can understand how the data sets were built and what the different components are. And we provide a whole system for documenting the contents of this data set in a way that people can properly understand and interpret the data set. So one of the things that we do within the K&B repository is we follow the Data 1 guidelines for documenting the provenance of data sets. And what this means is that we're really trying to understand the lineage of processing that allows us to go from raw source data all the way to the final products of an analysis or model. And so in this case, I'm showing a 3-step workflow that starts with raw data sources on the left. All these tables that are here on the left-hand side, they flow through an R script, which is highlighted here as part of the arrow, which is a data cleaning step that produces the data set that we're looking at in the middle, this alkanes data set. And that in turn is fed into a data processing script, the green arrow on the right. And then that in turn produces a couple of map visualizations that are archived to the data set as well. So this kind of a multi-step provenance trace is one of the types of features of the K&B that I think is really valuable to producing a open and reproducible documentation of the workflow that somebody used when they were doing their analysis. So I want to shift gears for a little bit and just talk about, you know, the wide variety of repositories that are available. So while the KNB is a great repository, and I'll promote it like crazy because it's been sort of like part of my whole career and mission to support open data archival. There are a huge number of repositories, as I showed in that re3 data list, and the challenge becomes, how do you get access to data that exist in this broader landscape? And that's where Data One comes in. Data One is a network. It's an international network trying to produce a shared catalog of data that span all these various repositories around the world. Because Data One's focused on preservation and access to data, we've really focused on building a curated collection of repositories that are archival in nature and want to work together for interoperability and to build a shared discovery system. So Data One is currently comprises of 55 member repositories that started joining in 2012, and our 3 most recent ones this year are the South Florida Water Management District and their Everglades Restoration Program. The International Year of the Salmon is coming on board right now, and we're bringing on a climate resilience project out of the Army Corps of Engineers this year as well, and hopefully more as we move through time. But there's a huge variety of repositories, everything from hydrology and hydroshare. PNDB is the French Biodiversity Institute. ARMS, the Atmospheric Research Monitoring Agency from DOE. Pangea is one of the large repositories in Germany. There's a huge number from NSF-funded research, from NOAA, from the EPA, or from the USGS and other repositories. So we're really excited about the network that we've been able to build. And what that's allowed us to do is to produce a cross-disciplinary corpus of data that is, you know, widely useful to scientists that are trying to do synthetic and integrative work. So whether you're working in life sciences or geosciences, if you're working in, you know, geophysics or you know, epidemiology or ecology, you can find data that's of relevance and of interest from within Data One. Data One primarily, its primary mission is to, you know, provide a federated search and discovery interface that allows you to work with this wide variety of member repositories from the different walks of the world. So this federated search basically presents a single user interface where people can come in and search for and find data that might be pulled from the Arctic Data Center or EDI or LTR or any of the other repositories within the system. And we're working to kind of harmonize and structure the information that's in those repositories so that it's interoperable. So this allows us to do searches for example, the creators or the parameters that are in data sets or other types of structured semantic annotations that are common across different repositories, even though those repositories all use their own different software, their own metadata standards, they're focused on different domains and disciplines, but we can search them as if they're much more integrated. This kind of loose coupling really provides a powerful resource for people to search and find data that's of interest to them in Data One. So the federated search works like this. Basically have this collection of data repositories. They're all different in the sense of they're all different types of a repository's infrastructure, but regardless of what kind of repository infrastructure they have, you can launch a term for something like carbon cycling and get back a subset of results from a certain set of repositories. And for each of the different types of queries you might launch against the repositories, you get a different set of repositories that will have relevant information for that particular query. So Data One, as an interoperable federation of repositories, currently has about 839,000 data sets that are available from that repository. They come from over 150,000 different contributors, and we get about on the order of 20,000 users a month accessing and looking for data within the network. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can leverage this infrastructure within Data One to support researchers and organizations that have an interest in and role in using the data from Data One. So at Data One, we're trying to focus on supporting individuals and lab groups, thematic groups, or university departments, as well as organizations like data repositories or field stations, small libraries and research data management units. And we're trying to support them by providing mechanisms for them to create smaller data portals that represent sort of a research home for their data, regardless of which repository it might reside in. So Data One Plus is a service that we've been providing for the last couple of years that provides the ability to create basically custom collections of data that span the network. And so you might have a research project, they can select out the data that's particularly of interest to them and build a research portal that contains that data, and it's a way for them to present stuff to the world, even though their data might be spread across multiple different repositories within the Data One network. So all of your data can be basically shown in one place, even though they're spread across multiple networks. This is oftentimes the case with people that, for example, deposit data in an institutional repository, but they also deposit data, say, in Dryad when they're doing a journal publication, or they might have a mandate to deposit data in a particular repository as associated with their funding. And so their data gets spread out across multiple repositories, but they can still set up one of these portals, and then they can create a customized search experience for people to access that data from wherever it may lie. So the way it works is we have all these data files that are part of the stack of data that are a stack of repositories that are part of Data One. We can then build a virtual portal, which is basically a query that defines the collection of data that come from each of these different repositories and are relevant to the particular portal that somebody's trying to build. And then people can do queries on different types of topical areas. So you might have one virtual portal that focuses on sea ice and another that focuses on permafrost, or say a specific research project. So we have a wide variety of portals that people have built. I have two examples here, one for the Northern Gulf of Alaska LTI data catalog, which has pulled data from a number of different repositories that represents the data that long-term ecological research site is collecting, and another which is an international effort called Mosaic, the Multidisciplinary Drifting Observatory for the Study of Arctic Climate. Mosaic was basically a shipboard expedition that involved 13 countries, all collecting data over a one-year period on the RV Polar Stern, the big icebreaker from Germany. And so this Mosaic effort, wanted to collect data all across a real wide variety of projects that were funded to work on that during the year. And the data portal provides the ability to get access to the data that's part of that Mosaic program. Similarly, more institutional members like field stations can create data portals. The Toolik Field Station in Alaska was interested in this. We met Amanda Young, who's at another one of our training events, like the one that Marcus went to. Amanda was super excited about the idea of being able to put together a catalog that spanned the data that they hold, not just in the LTR, but across a wide variety of other data repositories. And so they are able to easily find the data that's being collected in that specific region of the Earth that they focus on at Toolik. And similarly, individual researchers can create portals that represent their research labs or their research areas. We have a collaborator, Sparkle Malone. She's an assistant professor at Florida International University, and she's created a portal that represents the research that's happening in their ecology lab and the data that comes out of that. And so these kinds of individual researcher portals are part of what we're trying to support through Data One. So there's a wide variety of these on the Data One site. And if you go there, you can find the portal listing. They span everything from individual research projects to thematic areas like salmon data or insects and climate change and things like that. So portals give people the ability to create, a custom collection, but they also give people the ability to create a view of their data where you can customize the search fields that are relevant. So if I'm creating a portal on salmon data, I might be interested in searching on the salmon species, or I might be interested in searching on a particular regional area that was covered by that salmon data set. And that would be very different than, say, if I was creating an oceanographic portal where which vessel something came from or the type of say, oceanographic instrument that was used are the most important search parameters. So within the Data One system, you can customize which search fields are prioritized and displayed, which makes it a really great experience for people that are focusing in on, say, soil science or aquatic ecology or some particular subdiscipline of the whole space that Data One covers. You can also brand these portals and change the colors and the logos and the menus to a certain degree in order to provide personalized a view of things. And we support the creation of markdown pages that let you describe a much broader suite of things than just the data. So you can have a bunch of documentation in Markdown that sort of provides the context around your data. So for example, one of the portals that we built is the State of Alaska's Salmon and People project. This portal was one of the flagship portals that we built the system around. In this case, we collated about 130 data sets on salmon in Alaska. And the researchers that were involved with that all built out this set of informational pages about Alaska's salmon systems, and each one has a series of narrative text that's written in Markdown, and it has embedded in it figures and graphs, which are drawn directly from the data sets that are in the SASAP portal. So this data set on the left, on age, sex, and length that I showed before, this data set has a variety of both R script CSV files, but also image files that are the graphs that came out of those analyses. And then those are embedded in Markdown pages as part of the narrative text explaining the whole area of data that's part of this portal. In addition, the portals and our repositories in general support a variety of features that might be of interest to researchers. One of the primary ones we support is the data citation. So every data set that's part of at least most of the repositories in Data One can usually have a persistent identifier, like a digital object identifier, that lets people create a citation that other people can cite in their paper. So here I show a paper from Hioiken. It's been downloaded 71,000 times. It's been viewed, the data set itself has been viewed about 3,000 times, and it's had 9 people cite it in other types of work where people have tried to use this data set. So by having these really formalized identifiers and formalized citations, we can track as part of a portal all of the downloads associated with, say, that whole collection. So you can say, look at all of your labs data and how often is all that being downloaded and viewed, and you can collate all of the citations that are being made. And we follow a couple of standards, the Counter Code of Practice for Research Data that came out of the Make Data Count project. And so these data citations and these kinds of reports on data reuse are really important for people to justify why they're preserving data for other people to access. And then we also provide a variety of services and reports around making your data fair. So while it's easy to deposit a pretty lightweight record, we're really trying to encourage people to be comprehensive about their documentation and really make sure that they're filling all the boxes associated with how to make data understandable and reusable. And so our FAIR reports provide kind of an automated suite of checks that let somebody understand whether they've provided all of the metadata that they need to. So in this case, you can see a breakdown for this data from community response, where we've said that they've filled out 100% of the fields that make the data findable and interoperable, but there's still some work to be done on reusable data sets. And it gives people specific recommendations on areas that they could be more complete in their data and documentation. So these kinds of reports, just like the citation reports, can be summarized across a whole portal collection so that people can get a sense of how their whole data set portal is doing. So this is an example of the custom search feature of portals. It basically provides a view into this SASAP data space where you can see custom query filters on habitat and fish productivity and harvest and management that wouldn't normally be found in the Data One wide search, but can be sort of customized for this specific area of research data. So the last thing I want to mention is that in addition to these domain repositories that a variety of groups run, like the KNB and Dryad and Zenodo and others, in addition to that and the portals you can build upon it, there are at times reasons for institutions to run their own repositories. And so we encounter a lot of groups over the years that have been running their own repositories. Sometimes they're smaller groups like field stations or marine labs, and they may not have all of the infrastructure that they need to operate that repository efficiently or in a cost-effective way. And so we've started the new infrastructure program at Data One that we call the Data One Hosted Repository. And we've been offering a service where we'll operate a dedicated and standalone repository system for a group that has a long-term interest in maintaining a data repository. It's operated on our infrastructure. It uses trusted software. It's archival in nature. It has a powerful web-based submission and editing system, all the stuff we've been showing you so far, but it's dedicated to a particular repository. And so we've done that, for example, most recently, the Everglades Restoration Project in South Florida has started using this service and just came online a few months ago. They've been collecting data for many years, and they have about 100 data sets in Southern Florida where they've documented and put their data into this repository and are starting to use this portal system and the overall framework that we talked about in order to support their research mission in the Everglades. And so if people have interest in dedicated repositories, Data One could be of help there as well. But it's really something that would really only be applied to groups that really have a long-term interest in maintaining a repository and for some reason wouldn't want to deposit their data in a more open archival repository like the KNB or Dryad or EDI or something like that. All right, so with that, I think I'll wrap it up and say thank you. I appreciate the time to present, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Matt. I consider that sufficiently demystified now, so I definitely appreciate that. Any questions for Matt before I pull some from the forms?
Marcus, this is Mike McManus. I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Matt, I was wondering, particularly with the Everglades example, one thing I've never been able to quite understand with the repositories is where or how do you describe the purpose or the intent of a study? Where is that context given, and how does somebody discover that so that, say, they go to the Everglades Restoration Project area and find out, oh, this study used a random selection of sites. Oh, this study used a targeted selection of sites. Where do you learn that context?
Yeah, that's a great question. The different metadata standards that are in use by different repositories all have different places for that, but most of them do have fields for describing that type of thing. So within the ecological metadata language, you would typically describe that kind of a context at a high level in the abstract, but then in a more detailed way in the purpose statement or in the research methods statements that are in the metadata record. What we found over the years is that it's actually fairly difficult to get people to provide a lot of descriptive text in these fields. And so you do find in a lot of repositories a fairly minimal amount of that information. It's not because the metadata standards don't support it. It's just that I think people are time constrained and they oftentimes don't necessarily fill out as complete a record as they could. But there are places for that. There's been a movement towards, I don't know, over the last decade or more, creating data papers, which are basically like little mini publications about a data set. So journals like Scientific Data and Ecological Archives of the Ecological Society and things like that have been producing these data papers for a while now. And what we've seen is that people are far more willing to provide that more detailed narrative about purpose and methods in those kinds of data papers than they typically do in a repository metadata record. So we'd like to see repositories move towards more of an ability to display a data set as if it were like a little mini paper. I think for at least a lot of academic researchers, there's something about that format that's very motivating to see something that sort of looks like and smells like a paper, even if it is just a documentation of a research product. So I think we've been thinking about how to support that in our repositories. We have a pretty rich metadata editor that lets you provide lots of narrative text for things, and to varying degrees, different researchers do that. For the Arctic Data Center, we have a set of curation standards that we enforce for deposits because we curate every data set that's coming in. Whereas for the KNB repository, which, like I said before, is a caveat emptor repository, It's really up to the researcher to decide what the extent of the metadata that they're going to provide is, and we don't really have any editorial control, mainly for funding reasons. As a free repository that can be usually, we really don't have the staff to be editing all of the metadata coming in, but it's a valuable service if you do have somebody that can help curate and get a complete documentation. That answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Alex, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so how do the different like metadata data languages like both be general to kind of work for like a ton of projects, but also be specific to provide like the data that you or the information about the data that you actually need for like different types of equipment across a ton of fields? Like I've never really known like what would go into a metadata thing, or like how I could like really effectively sort through it. I feel like when I often see metadata, it's just kind of like this long list that's like pseudo code, pseudo abbreviations, and pseudo real text, like an XML file, and you just scroll through it, and it's hard to find what you actually need. Like, how do you go through that effectively and make sure you're putting things that people actually need in there?
Yeah, I think it can feel a little bit mechanistic about what goes in there, and it's not always entirely obvious. But regardless of what discipline you're working from, I think all of the standards cover, a series of similar areas. So they have bibliographic information about the data set, who basically around credit and attribution. They usually have a bunch of methodological and scientific justification sections on why the data set was collected and how it was done and what the sampling design was. And then they have a variety of structure and content areas. They focused on things like, what are the data files, what's the data model, how are the data collected, how does the, say, variable structure within data files map to the sampling design in a particular study. So you can say this particular table has the plot data from this survey, and then you have to explain, for example, the blocking and replication, and then for individual measurements, things like the units of measurement. And so all that structural information is in there, and that's what we build, structured search catalogs like Data One on. It does require a lot of work to get in there and do that. And I've seen, when I've looked through a lot of metadata records, I can say that the vast majority of them are woefully incomplete, which makes it really hard to build a comprehensive search system. And I think it can be frustrating for researchers to get to a metadata record that's tantalizingly close. Like, I think this data is of interest to me, but you can't really tell from the metadata record, and you just have to download the data. And that is unfortunately the state of the world. But like I said in the middle of the talk when I was talking about metadata quality, I think some repositories are better at encouraging high quality metadata than others. Like, some of them have some of the tools we were talking about in the Data One system that let you, sort of vet and understand just how interoperable and how reusable those data are. So
cool, thank you.
It is a trade-off with time too, right? I mean, researchers have limited time, and I mean, you have to decide how much of your time you're going to spend documenting your past work versus, say, starting a new research collection effort or something. And so, I understand it's not a simple, calculus to say you should spend the maximum amount of time on every data set, and every researcher sort of comes out of that with a different decision, I think.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So I just wanted to introduce Dave Viglias. I think Dave's on the call still. I can't see the participant list at the moment, but Dave is my colleague at Data One, and Dave has a long history with data repositories as well. One of the big differences is that while I focus on ecology and earth science data repositories, Dave's had a huge long history in the biodiversity realm. And there's a whole, I think, other landscape of repositories for biodiversity data that are somewhat different from the approaches used in the earth sciences. And so I don't know, Dave, if you had any things you wanted to add about kind of how biodiversity repositories kind of differ in this landscape.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I think the main difference is that a lot of the biodiversity repositories that I work with, in the past at least, are more about collections of individual samples. So there's a very large number of smaller records describing individual samples, whereas most of the repositories I think Matt was talking about are more collections of data sets, with each data set being a bundle of observations or samples. So that's I think the main difference, and there's obviously a lot of issues as far as nomenclature and what properties need to be associated with all these individual records and so forth. And I guess the other difference is that biodiversity repositories, obviously tend towards metadata that's more focused on organismal issues or properties, like the Darwin Core, for example.
Yeah, so I assume you guys have a mix of both physical and biological biodiversity data in TBEP.
Yeah, we have a lot of different types. If it's relevant to the bay, it's fair game. Water quality, it's obviously our bread and butter, but we have a lot of biological data, and most of, like, 95% of the data that we use is collected by our partners. We at TBEP don't collect it, so we have to kind of incentivize our partners to serve up the data in a way that's not just useful for our needs, but anybody else, which is a lot of potential other users. They could find it in a way that is meaningful for whatever application it's used for. And to be fair, a lot of the data is already publicly available. So, is it reasonable to ask them to host their data in a completely another location? Some cases, yes. Some cases, no. But there's other data products where we have more control over, like I mentioned, projects that are funded under TBERF, which is our Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. And those are projects that we seed that are usually one-offs, but maybe can lead to bigger projects. But they're generally projects that are meant to fill information gaps or boots on the ground type projects, field restoration projects that I think we can do a much better job of making sure those data are accessible in a repository. So I think there's a lot to be done, and what you shared, Matt, and thank you for joining us today, Dave. Definitely can help us move towards a more equitable and better way to share this information. So I want to pivot now and make sure that Greg has enough time to have a discussion about no-code, low-code apps. And thanks again to Matt for talking. And I know it's incredibly early for you. And I don't think I mentioned this, but he's in Alaska, so it's very early in the morning for him. So I definitely appreciate you getting on and sharing this information with us today. So if any other questions for Matt, feel free to reach out to me. I can reach out to Matt, or Matt, if you don't have any issues with people contacting you directly, that'd certainly be appreciated.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm welcome to have discussions with folks, so I can share my email or share my email address with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, Greg, if you're online, you can sort of kick off this discussion, but I'll just give a quick intro. So, Greg shared this article with me a couple months ago that's linked here about this sort of newish trend of developing dashboards without code, and I think there's a lot of potential there, but I think there's trade-offs as well. So without stealing your thunder, Greg, I'll let you have the floor. Do you need to have presenter access, or are you fine just sort of?
No, unfortunately, I was unable to develop a slide for you, but I believe this issue is simple enough to represent, and thank you for the one that you have provided. There's a new paradigm in tool and application development that's sweeping through the commercial sector. And I mean really sweeping. Its growth rate is about 20% per year, called no code, low code. And it's came about after the widespread adoption of apps and tools that are sort of akin to the content management system that you use to develop a website without being an HTML programmer, like Joomla, et cetera, Magnolia, those sorts of major, content management systems. The interesting things about this, or the thing that I found interesting, is not only was this a result of the emergence of supporting technology, but it also has a sociological perspective behind it. And I sent Marcus a link from an article that I believe was in TechCrunch that talked about the sociological perspective behind this. And I found that the most fascinating aspect. I am not a sociologist. I'm not going to get into it, but those of us that higher positions are well aware of the differences in perspective of the workers of today on many issues that have affected how they learn the basic skills that were important to us when we were learning procedural based programming languages. If you want to experiment with low code, no code stuff, and you don't have big pockets, and I'll caution you, because these applications are so valuable in the commercial sector, actually everything I found that you'd want to play with has a monetization method of some type. I found a couple that I'm going to recommend that you take a look at. One is called Saltcorn, and it's saltcorn.com. It's a open source platform that's distributed under the MIT license. Saltcorn apps must be hosted somewhere. They could be a Linux server, or the provider of the developer of the product does rent out server space for developers. The cool thing about Saltcorn is they have a free trial library hosting that you could develop and test your application on their own server. A little bit slower performance than you would get on your own server, but you can prototype ideas pretty quickly. The other big use of no code and low code is for mobile device front end development. The one of choice here is something you'll find in the Apple app library called Pineapple. Just like the fruit, it's a drag and drop visual mobile device app developer. Many trendy apps have a mobile front end or dashboard or interface of some type or another. This one is particularly attractive because it exports native Xcode to the Apple device. So it's very fast. I'm going to allow some room for questions and answers, so I don't want to say anything more. There's plenty of questions I know most people would have about these. However, I do believe they have lowered the barriers to a lot of potentially useful task automation, dashboard, and tools. And there's something to be aware of. And finally, I'll throw it back to Marcus, who has recently, at the RStudio conference last week, learned about a variation of Shiny that he wants to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Before I do that, does anybody have any thoughts on this concept in general? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How can we use it? We obviously, the Estuary program, we use Shiny, and all of the apps that we've developed are code based, so we're all just writing our code basically. And I know if you're not familiar using R, or even Shiny, which is a step beyond R, that can be a very real hurdle to developing these things. And so I see this movement as kind of a value, and definitely lowering the barrier to inclusion in developing your own apps. But in my perspective, you oftentimes can sacrifice functionality by switching from strictly code to something that's driven by a graphical interface. So, but if it brings more people to the table, then in my mind, it's can be a good thing. So, we're just kind of throwing this out here as something for discussion by the group. Does anybody have any comments on that or thoughts on this as a potential value proposition towards our community?
And I get this is Matt. I do have a question about this. So there have been historically a really long history of people trying to build basically visual programming approaches, from throughout the years. And I think although you can oftentimes create a visual programming environment for especially the user interface end of something, I mean, ultimately there's a certain degree of data massaging, cleaning, integration, and statistical analysis that needs to go into any complex project, that there's just no substitute for a programming language for those things. And so my impression was that these types of applications are more about assembling a dashboard from a set of already cleaned and homogenized data. So you're basically working on the presentation end of a already set up workflow for creating data sources that can be presented. But are you thinking that this actually provides the entire workflow from stem to stern, or from raw data all the way through to end user experience, or am I right that it's kind of more of the dashboard end of things? It's just the end step of a much longer process.
Let me make some comments on this, Marcus, because I had the exact same experience. I've been in drag and drop interface development since the 80s. I've seen all flavors of this. But when I saw the latest apps, the first thought of it wasn't really about dashboards. It was really about task automation. And my first task, I would love to find one to try it on, is the tiny data problem. When you have a database that's already built that needs to be reorganized and cleaned up to make it more acceptable. Some of these apps are very powerful, but the powerful ones come with a big price tag with them, because commercial vendors know how valuable they are. We are not yet seeing the really powerful, flexible ones in the open source or low cost arena yet. I'll just close by mentioning that the latest trend in commercial low code, no code is integration of these tools with AI databases, such as the ones used for facial recognition and machine translation. Those are both exceptionally powerful applications. They also come with massive security and privacy concerns that people are beginning to navigate. And just to close my discussion out, I'll make the one shortcoming I see of all these approaches is that they are difficult to document your workflow with them in a repository. As we discussed this, they produce no summary or flow chart of how the workflow was done, of how they work. So that's the one weakness I see in these applications. The big strength is you brought a lot more people to the table doing the work of open science, even if it's a small section of the work. And I'll leave it with that. And thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I guess I want to revisit Matt's comment. I mean, having not been in the game quite as long as you, Greg, I see these more as just a platform for developing a user interface. It's not something that's going to be, at least the tools that I'm familiar with, tools that are going to be integrated in the broader workflow of tapping into a data from source, cleaning up the data, developing the server backend that does all the working pieces, and then finally the user interface. But if we can, I guess I see these as maybe like a gateway drug in a way, where if people sort of get kind of comfortable using the user interface drag and drop utilities that these platforms can offer, but it gives them the ability to maybe step into the other world of just this broader pipeline and workflow of the whole process, maybe further down the line, then I think that's a win. I'll just close by kind of showing you this shiny dashboard builder. This was something that was showcased at the RStudio conference last week, and there's a lot of buzz about it on Twitter and whatnot, because this is kind of the first case of a platform where you can build the user interface side of a Shiny application completely through a drag and drop style interface. And I played around with it the other day, and it's actually quite minimal. But to make the case of like how this is sort of a gateway to, I think, a more integrated workflow, you can actually, so I'll just briefly show you the how this works. So you can pull in an external file from your desktop. So I'm going to pull in a already tidy data set of fish data from FWRI to do this. So this is just a data set of catch over time for different species, but you can pull in the data, add an element. So here, just kind of making a plot of catch over time for pinfish. Just leave it at that. And now, here's an already made. Should be able to size this accordingly. There we go. There's a nice plot. You can add tables. I'll just do year, mullets, whatever. There's a table. So it looks like, a shiny dashboard on the front end, but you can export this from the export functionality, and you have basically what this is an RStudio project with the code for the front end, and now I have basically the UI for this, and now it's an RStudio project that I can then integrate into these other workflows. So this is like just the building blocks to starting on something much bigger and greater that could be helpful. But this whole dashboard builder in Shiny is still very new. It'd be interesting to see how it develops over time. To me, it's still fairly minimal, but perhaps a step in the right direction for bringing in other folks that might not otherwise know where to start with building a Shiny dashboard. So any questions, comments about that? We're at 11:30, so I want to wrap up, but I want to pause for a second and see if anybody has any thoughts on this.
Yeah, Marcus, I had a quick question. So that seems useful because I played around a bit with Shiny and I was able to get it working, but like getting everything in the right spot, figuring out exactly how to get things to react was, a bit of a challenge at first. So, it kind of seems nice to get like kind of the building blocks of where you want things to go and then being able to, download the code and, build it out from there seems nice. But when you build it out a little bit, can you like load it back into there and then like try and make some tweaks? Like if you're like, oh, you know what, I want to add like another panel, but I've like already added this extra functionality. Could you load it like back into there and be like add a couple things and then re-export it?
I don't know. I don't think that functionality is there yet in the dashboard that you are creating is, I think it's a Shiny Dash or something like that. It's a very specific type of dashboard. It wouldn't really
Okay,
necessarily
gotcha.
play well with other packages. We use Flex Dashboard a lot,
Okay.
and I don't think it would work for that. But in terms of like this iterative workflow, I have no idea. I see that maybe is more of a pain because you're going back and forth
Okay.
between different platforms. But yeah, I would keep an eye on the repository. Like I said, there's a lot of buzz about this on Twitter. But you can go to the GitHub repository and check the issues and see what people are posting about to see if there's requests for different features and whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might even it seems like kind of the direction they're going, but I don't know if it'll ever get that mature. Is like they have for Markdown now, like Visual Editor in RStudio. It seems like they're kind of trying to get a little bit into that for Shiny with this, but I don't know if it'll ever become kind of as fully featured as like our Markdown's Visual Editor.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm personally, I probably won't use this at all. But again, I mean, if other folks find it useful, it could be valuable. So, all right. Oh yeah, that's some good humor for you. Who's writing HTML from scratch these days? I guess some people are, but yeah. So our next meeting is going to be November 1st, in roughly 3 months' time. So if anybody has any suggestions for speakers or topics, definitely let us know. And again, I think I'm going to try for an open science training early 2023 with Chris Anastasia from the Southwest Florida Water Management District. We gave a training at the SURF meeting back in November of last year that we're going to re-envision for kind of a local version here. So with that, thank you all for joining us. And again, thanks to our speakers, Matt and Greg, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.